The negotiation room aboard the Terran diplomatic vessel was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow of holographic projections displaying trade routes, territorial maps, and potential resource exchanges. Director, a official of the Empire, sat rigidly in her chair, her iridescent exoskeleton shifting slightly in the light. Her eyes analyzed every movement of the human seated across from her. Jon Carter, a seasoned diplomat of the Terran Republic, leaned back in his chair with a relaxed posture that did not match the intensity of the moment. He drummed his fingers lightly against the polished meta table, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips as he observed the official's body language. You understand, of course, that the Empire has little reason to accept such an agreement, stated, her voice clicking in a rhythmic cadence. Historically, human expansion has rarely remained within the limits of negotiation. You take, even when the terms are set otherwise. Jon chuckled, tilting his head slightly as if considering her words. That's an interesting interpretation of history. But I'd argue that humans don't take. We simply adapt faster than most species expect. There's a difference. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You assume that we want this sector as a show of power, but really, what we're offering is stability. That benefits both of us. Mandibles twitched slightly, a sign of irritation or contemplation. Stability for whom? Your people or ours? Because I fail to see how Terran control over the sector is advantageous to the. You are asking us to relinquish valuable trade routes, to trust that you will not press further into our influence. Forgive my skepticism, but history has not been kind to those who believed in human restraint. Jon exhaled slowly and tacked a few commands on the holographic interface in front of him. The projections shifted, revealing detailed reports of trade ships and an increasing threat from hostilities. Your problem isn't us, Director. It's them. Your empire is bleeding resources just trying to maintain a presence in this sector. You're losing ships, supplies, and, more importantly, credibility. You think the empire looks strong by clinging to a position that's only making you weaker. Claws tapped lightly against the table, an involuntary response to her frustration. You speak as though this is a favor to us. Yet, I fail to see the sacrifice on your part. Jon grinned. That's the beauty of it. There is none. We both win. The Terran Republic secures the trade routes and cleans up the sector, ensuring peace and profitability. In return, they get priority access to those very same routes without lifting a finger. No war, no loss of resources, and you get to claim that you made the practical decision rather than forcing a conflict you weren't ready for. Studied him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable, but the tension in her posture softened slightly. You are confident, as always. Too confident. And yet, you have not given me reason to trust that this arrangement will remain as you claim. Jon leaned back again, his smile fading slightly into something more measured. Trust is built, not handed out. But consider this, you have two options. When you refuse, and this sector continues to slip from your control while your enemies chip away at your supply lines. Eventually, you'll have to fight, and even if you win, you'll lose more than you gain. 2. You take the deal, retain your trade benefits, and let us handle the chaos. Your empire maintains face, and you walk away without spilling a single drop of blood. Gaze drifted to the projections, her mind processing the risks and potential outcomes. They prided themselves on strategy, on understanding the long game. She had known from the start that humans played by their own set of rules, but Jon Carter was different. He didn't just negotiate, he maneuvered. This wasn't a diplomatic request. It was a calculated move, when designed to place the Terran Republic in a position of quiet dominance without firing a shot. The silence stretched between them before she finally clicked her mandibles in what could almost be considered amusement. You are dangerous, Jon Carter. Not because of your threats, but because you make me believe you do not need them. Jon raised his hands in mock surrender. I'm just a guy trying to find a solution that works for everyone. narrowed her eyes but then inclined her head slightly. Very well. The Empire will agree to the proposal, on the condition that we maintain a presence within the sector as observers. If your Republic's intentions are as honorable as you claim, you will not object to transparency. Jon nodded as if he had expected the condition all along. That sounds fair. I'll have the details drafted up for official approval. He extended a hand across the table, a gesture humans used to seal agreements. Hesitated, then extended one of her clawed appendages, allowing Jon to grasp it in a firm but respectful shake. It was a human custom, but when that, in this moment, bridged the unspoken understanding between them. As Jon withdrew his hand, he smiled. I think you'll find, Director, that working with us is far more profitable than working against us. Gave a slow nod. For now, perhaps. But do not mistake cooperation for complacency, Ambassador Carter. Do not forget the nature of those who play the long game. The space station orbiting the diplomatic hub of Prime was a marvel of engineering, a floating jewel of interstellar diplomacy where the most powerful factions of the galaxy met to broker fragile alliances. Within one of its many private lounges, Jon Carter nursed a glass of something vaguely alcoholic, watching the intermingling species move about the grand hall beyond the glass walls. His attention, however, was not on the bustling social engagement but rather on the approaching figure of Director. The official moved with a measured grace, her iridescent exoskeleton reflecting the ambient light of the chamber. She took the seat opposite him without waiting for an invitation, her multifaceted eyes locking onto his with a look of calculated curiosity. You seem at ease, Jon Carter. Should I take that as a sign that you believe yourself victorious? Her voice carried the same cool detachment as ever, though there was a subtle undercurrent of amusement. Jon smirked and took a slow sip of his drink. Victorious? No, just satisfied. The agreement was a step in the right direction. Though, I won't lie, I expected more pushback from your side. It almost felt easy. Let out a series of rhythmic clicks, a sound he had come to recognize as the version of laughter. Easy? You underestimate how much effort it takes to allow something to appear effortless. Our council debated your proposal for nearly 3 cycles before reaching a consensus. There were many who wanted to reject it outright, but they could not ignore the logic. Or the alternative. Jon tilted his head slightly. And where do you stand in all of this? Were you for or against the agreement? Was silent for a moment, her clawed fingers tapping lightly against the polished surface of the table. I was for it, she admitted, her gaze unflinching. Not because I trust humanity, but because I understand them. The galaxy sees humans as impulsive, reckless, prone to chaos. That perception is not entirely incorrect. However, what they fail to recognize is that within your chaos lies an unparalleled ability to adapt and survive. It is not your weapons that make you dangerous, Jon Carter. It is your ability to turn disadvantage into opportunity. Jon chuckled softly, setting his glass down. Flattery, Director? Careful, someone might think you actually like me. Mandibles twitched slightly, an expression Jon had learned to interpret as something between mild exasperation and amusement. I do not make alliances based on personal sentiment. I make them based on calculated necessity. And at this moment, aligning with the Terran Republic is the most logical path forward. Jon leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting to something more serious. Then let me ask you something, Director. What happens when no longer see that necessity? When this alliance is no longer in your best interest? Studied him carefully, her gaze unreadable. Then we will reassess. Just as I expect humanity would do in our position. Jon nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated that answer. Fair enough. I'd be lying if I said humans don't operate the same way. But there's something to be said about mutual respect, about building something that lasts beyond immediate convenience. Clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps. But lasting alliances require trust, and trust is not something the give freely. Jon smirked again. Then it's a good thing humans love a challenge. For the first time, allowed herself the smallest nod of agreement. Indeed. There was a pause between them, not of tension but of quiet understanding. The galaxy was a place of shifting allegiances and priorities. Yet, in that moment, Jon Carter and Director were aligned, not as friends, but as two individuals who understood the game they were playing. Jon lifted his glass in a small toast. To calculated necessity, then inclined her head. To survival. Their glasses clinked softly, and for now, that was enough. The war room aboard the Terran Republic flagship Iron Resolve was bathed in the soft glow of strategic, each showcasing different sectors of contested space. Officers moved with purpose, analyzing battle reports and logistics updates. At the center of it all stood Jon Carter, his arms crossed as he studied the evolving map of the galactic Baordan zones. Director was beside him, her iridescent exoskeleton catching the dim light, her multifaceted eyes scanning the same display with an intensity that betrayed her usual composed demeanor. The delegation is concerned about the new front near the drift, stated, her voice clipped and precise. They believe the Imperium is preparing for an incursion beyond the neutral zones. Jon exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. Of course they are. The moment they saw us focusing on reinforcing the regions, they decided to probe the outer territories. Standard playbook tactics, poke where the enemy is weakest, see if they flinch. Turned slightly toward him. And will humanity flinch? Jon shot her a knowing smirk. You tell me, have we ever? Mandibles twitched slightly, a sign he had come to recognize as reluctant amusement. No. But there is a difference between not flinching and being reckless. They do not wish to be caught in another war due to humanity's enthusiastic responses to provocation. Jon let out a chuckle. Enthusiastic responses? I like that. You're learning how to phrase things in a way that doesn't make us sound like lunatics. Expression remained unreadable. It is not a matter of phrasing. It is a matter of accuracy. Jon sighed and tacked a few commands on the, zooming in on the drift. Alright, let's be honest. They aren't just testing our defenses. They're setting up for a major push. They wouldn't commit this many ships to a simple Baordan skirmish unless they were looking to establish a foothold. The question isn't whether we respond, it's how hard we hit them back. Regarded him carefully. A preemptive strike, then. Jon shrugged. Not necessarily. There are other ways to send a message. Ways that don't involve war. Mandibles twitched again, this time in skepticism. Subterfuge. Jon grinned. More like misdirection. We make it look like we're reinforcing the fleets, but quietly move a task force to flank them. They'll think we're distracted, push forward, and suddenly find themselves surrounded. If they're smart, they'll pull back before things get bloody. If they're not, well, that's their mistake to make. Was silent for a moment before inclining her head slightly. A tactically sound maneuver. Minimal direct engagement, yet maximum deterrence. You are playing a dangerous game, Jon Carter. Jon leaned back against the table, folding his arms. Always. The trick is making sure the other guy realizes it's too late to do anything about it. Studied him for a long moment. And if they call your bluff. Jon's smile faded slightly. Then we remind them why humanity doesn't play by the usual rules. We don't bluff. We maneuver, we adapt, and when we strike, we make damn sure it counts. Regarded him with something approaching approval. The Council believes humanity is still young in the grand scheme of galactic politics. But I see something different. You are not young. You are merely enshackled by convention. That is why you are dangerous. Jon gave her a mock salute. I'll take that as a compliment. Gaze shifted back to the. Very well. I will ensure the fleet remains neutral in this matter, provided humanity does not escalate beyond containment. Jon nodded. Fair enough. Just be ready to look the other way when we start moving pieces around the Baord. turned to leave but paused at the threshold of the war room. One last thing, Jon Carter. When this maneuver succeeds, and the withdraw, what then? Jon's grin returned, but there was an edge to it. Then we do what humans do best, Director. We take another piece of the board. Clicked her mandible softly, then disappeared into the corridor, leaving Jon alone with the flickering lights of the battlefield that had yet to be fought. The war was over. At least, that's what the official reports said. The Imperium had withdrawn, their fleets limping back beyond the drift after realizing they had been outmaneuvered, outclassed, and, most crucially, humanity had played its hand masterfully, orchestrating a campaign of strategic feints, rapid deployments, and precision strikes that had left the enemy reeling. It wasn't just brute force that won the day, it was something far more terrifying: adaptability. Jon Carter stood on the observation deck of Iron Resolve, hands resting on the reinforced railing as he stared at the stars. The remnants of the conflict were still visible. A few distant flashes of light where automated salvage drones picked apart derelict ships, the faint glow of plasma fires on abandoned wreckage. The battlefield would take years to fully clear, but the message had been sent loud and clear. Humanity was not to be tested lightly. Footsteps echoed behind him, and he didn't have to turn to know who it was. Director moved with a measured grace, her frame producing a faint clicking sound as she came to stand beside him. For a long moment, she said nothing, merely observing the same battlefield. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual, contemplative. "It is done." Jon exhaled slowly, nodding. "Yeah, it is." Studied him carefully, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the fading embers of conflict. "You do not seem triumphant." Jon let out a short chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "You don't celebrate a game you were forced to play. You just breathe easier knowing you don't have to make the next move, for now." Tilted her head slightly, an inquisitive gesture. And yet, humanity's moves were precise, calculated. Even the council was impressed. Jon finally turned to look at her. "Was that before or after they decided we were too dangerous to trust?" Hesitated, but she didn't deny it. "They are very, but not without cause. The way humanity operates, it is unlike any other species in the known galaxy. Even now, the Council debates whether this war has changed the balance of power irreversibly." Jon gave her a wry smile. "Let me guess. They're worried we might start taking more pieces off the board." Regarded him for a long moment before responding. "Are they wrong?" Jon turned back toward the window, his reflection staring back at him against the backdrop of distant stars. "Depends. Are they planning to get in our way?" Mandibles twitched, a sign of restrained emotion. "You are asking the wrong question. The Council does not fear what humanity has done. They fear what humanity will do. You have defied expectations at every turn. You do not follow the conventional rules of engagement. You refuse to be placed into the predictable patterns of galactic diplomacy. To them, that is not just concerning, it is terrifying." Jon let the words settle between them before responding. "Good." Blinked, clearly surprised by the bluntness of his answer. "You want them to fear you." Jon turned his gaze back to her, and for the first time, there was something unreadable in his expression. Something that wasn't quite amusement, nor arrogance, but something colden. "Fear keeps people honest. When they think they have you figured out, that's when they start making plans. When they don't know what you're capable of, that's when they think twice before doing something stupid." Clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "It is a dangerous path to walk, Jon Carter. Fear is a volatile currency. It can grant you power, but it can also create enemies where none existed before." Jon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I know. But let's be real here. Enemies were always going to exist. The difference is whether they see us as just another rival or as something they can't afford to cross." Remained silent for a moment before speaking again, her voice lower. "So this is your philosophy? Humanity must never be made an enemy because the consequences would be unacceptable." Jon's smile was slow, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Exactly. Let out a quiet chitter, something akin to a sigh. Will continue to monitor the situation. I do not know what conclusions they will come to, but you should be aware, this war, though brief, has changed everything. You may have won the battle, but in doing so, you have forced the galaxy to reevaluate humanity's place among the stars. Jon shrugged. Then they better make sure they come to the right conclusion. Gave him one last lingering look before turning to leave. She paused at the doorway, glancing back. And what is the right conclusion, Jon Carter? Jon looked past her, past the doorway, past the corridors of iron resolve, and into the infinite void beyond. His voice was quiet but resolute. That humanity isn't playing their game. We never were. Considered his words, then gave a slow, deliberate nod before vanishing into the corridor. Jon remained at the observation deck, watching as the salvage drones continued their work. The war was over. But the game? The game had only just begun.